As we were doing this, the students' basic objective was to look for their leaders, and when they found their leader, to get the signature of the leader on their score sheet. It was difficult, and if the students had just been plopped in the middle of the Brea Mall without any particular agenda, they wouldn't have found most of us. We would just look too different. But because they were on a hunt for us, they were looking for us, by and large, over the course of the hour or so, most of the leaders got found by most of the students, just because the students knew roughly what they were looking for. Now, my favorite story in this whole thing centers on Joe. Joe is in the upper right there, and to give you a little better picture here, that's Joe, who I guess was nursing a little bit of an eye infection, and that coupled with the wig made it so that he looked like he could be the lead singer for a punk band. Which was fun, but just like most of our other leaders, he got found. And so here's what tended to happen, is we'd have a group of students, they would kind of look a little closer, they go, yeah, that's Joe. They walk up to Joe, and they have Joe sign their piece of paper. Now, next to Joe was a group of tourists. And these tourists were clearly not from around here. And so a couple times, they just saw this group of young students come up to Joe, and from what they could tell, ask for his autograph. And so this happened enough times that they finally realized, like, this guy, he's somebody. And so they finally approached Joe. They didn't know who he was or what he was famous for, but he's like, who are you? Or they want to know, who was this guy? And Joe was too nice to, tell them, I'm actually not remotely famous to anybody. He just said, well, I work at Blizzard. He does. He works at a video game company. And that was good enough for them. They were super excited. They wanted his autograph, too. So Joe signed off his autograph, these guys. They got what they were looking for. And so did our students. And generally speaking, that's sort of a phrase I use when I talk about life, because for the most part, we find what we're looking for. Now, there's some caveats to this. If you're looking to be the next Kobe Bryant or Peyton Manning, or you're looking to be the next tech mogul making Facebook or Gmail, it's probably not going to happen. But to a certain extent, we organize our lives around the things that we're looking for. If we're looking for a fairly comfortable life with a good job, well, we start to build that system in place. It usually starts when we're young. We go to high school, try to get decent grades so we can go to a decent college to have decent career prospects so we can have a decent salary. We start that early. For someone who wants to travel, we'll probably organize our lives so that our schedule is flexible. If we're someone who wants a family, then we'll start the process of, okay, well, maybe I'll start to date, see if I can find that person that I would have a family with. We start to aim towards something. We put things in our lives to make that thing happen. And so it doesn't always work out this way by any means, but generally speaking, when we really want something, we tend to find it because we organize our lives in such a way that that's where we're heading. And so I think today, as we look into our series, we're going to find that this is true when we talk about our relationship with God. That at the end of the day, we get what we're looking for. Go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 6. We're in a series that we've been calling Revolutionary. And this series has focused on how Jesus is challenging our whole perspective of the world and how we live our lives. See, he's going to tell us things that oftentimes just straight up don't make sense to us, or if they make sense, they at least seem completely counterintuitive. They're different than the way that people typically operate. And so Jesus has been challenging us not to just live by the letter of the law, but to really have our hearts transformed and renewed by God. And so that means some pretty significant things, like the idea that anger could be just as significant as murder, or lust could be just as significant as adultery, because these are about heart issues, about our lives being transformed into the likeness of God. And so that's what we're jumping into. We're still jumping into this passage today. Right off the bat, we're going to see a problem, though. If you've been with us for a little while, you will have already seen this verse. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. It's the previous chapter. It says this, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." This is Jesus in the same set of teachings that we're about to be in today. And then this is our first verse. "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." These seem completely opposite, completely contradictory. It's like Jesus saying, you should root for the Angels and a winning baseball team this year. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? There's no way to get around this problem. Is there? I mean, do we do our good things so that people see them, or do we do our good things so people don't see them? What do we do with this? And here's the thing that I love about how Jesus teaches, is that he says some big statements, ones that are hard to sometimes get our head around, but oftentimes he's pointing to the same exact problem. And I really think that's what Jesus is doing here. It's the same problem. See, both have the same error that we all make all the time. That's prioritizing human affirmation, particularly positive human affirmation. See, in the first section there in Matthew chapter 5, this is right after Jesus talked about how people would be persecuted for his name. He said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for my name." And so he knew that the disciples and anyone who followed him would take on a significant risk by choosing to live their life the way that Jesus told them to. The temptation then, if you're trying to avoid negative human attention, or if you're trying to avoid persecution, is to kind of live your faith out very quietly. To really not make it a big deal, to kind of hide it in the shadows so that people can't associate you with whatever else is going on. I mean, think Peter when he denies Jesus 3 times, doing so probably for his own safety because he's afraid of what it would mean to be associated with Jesus in the moment he was arrested. Sometimes, as Christians, we can find ourselves in the same boat when it isn't particularly advantageous to be a Christian, when it seems like we're going to get a lot of bad publicity for it. And in some parts of the world where you may straight up get persecuted for it, it's easier sometimes to just live out your faith in quiet. But then, of course, no one sees you, and you don't get to spread the love of God wherever you go because you've done so privately. But you can make the exact same error in the total opposite direction. You can make the error of doing good things, great things even, things that you see in the Bible, things that Jesus told us to do, but do it specifically so people go, "Hey, that guy's spiritual," or something like that. Do it so that in people's eyes, we look like we're something. We look like we have significance. It's the same error both times. You can do the exact same good thing and err on both sides. It's so easy in our culture today, right? With social media, with Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all that stuff, you can very easily put yourself out there. It's very easy for people to see you, for people to comment on your stuff, for people to like what you have to say, or now you can like, love, wow, sad face, whatever the case may be, whatever you say. And people notice. And we have that in front of us. And so this is the challenge that we're going to see today. Jesus is going to be speaking to us about really what is going to be the second side of this error. The side where we do things because we want people to see them. And when we do that, we're going to find that we've missed out on the most important thing. We might get what we're looking for, but really what we're looking for wasn't worth all that much. Back in chapter 5, you also see this verse. It's verse 20. "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." This was back a few weeks ago, but the basic idea is this. Jesus is telling people that the righteousness of the Pharisees is insufficient, which was a crazy idea because the Pharisees lived their lives according to the law. They did everything they could. They tried to do everything right, everything that was within their power. And they frequently did, and they oftentimes did very publicly. And so the idea that you could be more righteous than a Pharisee was crazy. This word righteousness here, the basic idea is this. God was the one who took Israel out of Egypt, got them out of the desert. God met with them as a result that people wanted to meet with God. And the Old Testament law told them ways that they could do that. And so they did, because meeting with God was the most important thing that you could do. And the Pharisees, they had all these systems and these rules in place to help them do it. And at their best, they really were designed to help you connect with God. But a lot of the Pharisees, as much as they followed the rules in the Old Testament or just rules they set up for themselves, sometimes their hearts weren't there. They weren't experiencing transformation. They weren't experiencing a renewed life. They weren't experiencing the kingdom of God. And so Jesus is going to ask us to do things that sometimes seem way above what even the Pharisees did. Like, don't even remain angry with a person. Don't even let lust into your life. These are things that are different than the Old Testament and the rules that the Pharisees set, but he did it to help us understand that this is about us becoming more like God. That's the main point. And so his followers really could experience a sort of righteousness that is past the Pharisees. And it's the same word that we're going to see in verse 1. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. It's the same basic idea. You're going to do things to draw closer to God. That's understood. That anyone who's desiring to love God with their lives, they're going to do things to experience God in that way. But when you do it, don't do it to be seen by others. Because the moment we start to put human affirmation in the mix, things get a little bit muddy. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read the series of verses that we're talking about today. We're going to read verses 1 to 8. that we're going to skip a bunch of verses and then read verses 16 to 18. The reason we're skipping a bunch of verses is because if you were here last week, we already covered them. In the middle of this section is the Lord's Prayer. Dave talked about it last week. I strongly encourage you, if you didn't get to see it, to go online and to watch it. But we're going to skip over those verses this week because they fall in the middle of a section in which Jesus is really trying to make a very large, very big, and important point. And so we don't have time to jump into the Lord's Prayer specifically, but I think we're going to be able to see the rest of what Jesus is saying right around that section. And so go ahead and go back with me to verse 1. We're going to read it through. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Now, we're going to keep going, but to your best ability, in about 5 seconds, try and memorize the highlighted words, all right? Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full, and then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Got that memorized? Great. All right. Verse 5, and when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. These should look familiar. Again, if you haven't already, commit these to memory. Verse 7, when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And this probably won't surprise you. You're catching the pattern here. There's something that Jesus really wants to communicate. You know what's important when he says it 3 times. I had a college professor once who said, if I say something, you need to know it. If I say it twice, it's really important. You should really commit to memory. But if I say it 3 times, you can be certain it's going to be on the test. All right? Same idea here. 3 times, Jesus says these statements. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full, and then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And these things are opposite. See, when I read these passages a couple times over, I start to think Jesus really isn't trying to condemn very much. I think he's just making a very important observation. See, if you're doing things, even good things, primarily so that people see you and notice you, well, then you get exactly what you're looking for. People do that. And as it turns out, you get your reward in full. What you sought after, you have. It's yours. It's right there. They got exactly what they were looking for. The question is that really what you want? Is that really the direction that you want to head? Is that the thing that's of the most value? Because maybe there's something else to be offered. And that's the second phrase. Your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. See, when we do even good things with mixed motives, we oftentimes miss the whole point of doing that thing in the first place. These acts of righteousness, the things that we just talked about, giving, praying, fasting, they're designed to help us connect with the God of this world. But when we come to God with our own agenda, or with our own desires, or with the hope that other people will notice what we're doing, that actually is missing the point. And it impedes our ability to have a genuine encounter with God. Some things are like that in life. A couple months ago, just before I got married, I had what we call a bachelor party, and my best man, Keith, had the misfortune of having to figure out how to throw a bachelor party for me. And he finally figured out that the best thing he could do was lock me in a room with a bunch of puzzles and tell me I had 2 hours to figure them out and get out. So he did that. But it wasn't just me, actually. It was me and about 12 or so friends. And so we all went to this place together. And if you've ever done an escape room, it's a big thing right now. If you've ever done one, usually it's about 4 to 5 people in one smaller room. This was a little bit different. Since there were so many of us, we needed a bigger venue. Somebody had found a restaurant that did not survive the economic downfall of 2009 and had turned it into an escape restaurant. And so 13 of us and 7 others, because it could fit 20, went into this restaurant to be locked in for 2 hours so that we could find and solve all the puzzles to escape. So standing outside before we're let in, there's 2 things that you have to know. One is that the guy who was putting all this on for us warned us that the biggest problem most people have is that they don't work together. You're going to go into this room as 20 individuals, and you're not going to solve the puzzles because you all are focused just on yourselves. The other thing that you need to know is this. I put myself in this category a little bit too, but I have a couple friends who are really good at solving puzzles. 3 of them are engineers, and they were in the group that day. So what this means is, although this is a team exercise, we all know that to some extent, this is still a competition. At the end of the activity, we're going to be comparing notes and seeing who did what and who contributed. And so really, there's an important piece of competition. Now, we're not going to say that out loud, of course. No. But for those of us who were entering into it, trying to solve these puzzles, we either wanted to make sure that what we did and contribute to was known by everyone else, or at least we felt good about our own contribution to the group. So when he leaves us in, we've got 2 hours to do this, you got 20 people, and 13 of us are all scattering to go do our own thing, despite the fact that we've just been warned not to do that. And so here we all are trying to find these puzzles. Now, over the course of the 2 hours, we identified a couple things that were true. We needed 3 keys to get out of the restaurant. And by the end, we had 2 of them. There was 1 key that was remaining, and we even knew where it was, but it was behind a lock, and we didn't have the code to this lock. All we had were these multicolored blocks, 6 of them, each with a number on them, each a different color. We were certain that they had something to do with the code to the lock, but we couldn't figure it out. Now, as this 2 hours was unfolding, what typically happened was the 13 of us, we were trying to do our own thing, but sometimes, we would interact with each other because we knew each other. But the other 7 people, we almost never talked to. We just didn't know them. There wasn't animosity. It's just we don't trust you or something. I don't know. So there was one guy in this group who really had one thing he did the entire time. Early on in this whole setup, he found a book, and he was certain that this book was somehow supposed to solve one of our puzzles. And at one point, he came up to me and someone else, and we humored him. We looked through the book, but it was a novel. We couldn't figure out how it would be helpful, and it didn't help us solve our puzzle, so we gave it back to him, and he moved on. And he did the same thing with some other people. I have this book. It's probably important. And for 2 keys, that book did not matter, and people just completely ignored him. And so that became our pattern. We just ignored him. And so we get to this 3rd key, and we lost, really. We ran out of time. We were about to. There's no way we're going to finish on time. So the guy who was running it was going to give us a hint. And his hint, of course, was, look at the book. And so this isn't how it happened, but this is how it happened in my mind. The whole clump of us just part like the Red Sea, just staring at this guy with the book, like, okay, now what do we do? And so we go up to the book, and we open it. The book, by the way, had absolutely no helpful information whatsoever. However, wedged in the middle of the book was a bookmark that had the 6 colors in the order we needed to solve the lock. Totally missed it. See, in our effort to do our own thing, we had missed the bigger plan, which was to get out of that room alive. We were all theoretically dead, thanks to the earthquake. There's always a story with these things. All right. We missed the main point because we were stuck in our own little world. And this is what often happens when we approach the things that God has asked us to do, is that even good things, great things that God has desired from us, if we approach them stuck in our own little world, we can miss what is happening with God. We can miss it because we're focused on something else. And like we said earlier, we tend to get what we're looking for. So here's the conundrum. When you're looking at these things, there's basically 2 options on the table. One is you can do good things with the desire to be seen for them, and then you get that. You get to be seen for these things. The other is that you get this reward from your Father who is in heaven. Now, that reward piece is what's a little bit confusing sometimes, because it can feel like, well, what is that? Chris and I went to Disneyland about a year ago, and when we were walking up to the counter to get breakfast or ice cream or something like that, Kristen just asked the cashier how her day was. And she was absolutely flabbergasted, because I guess with thousands of guests guests in the park. No one ever asked the cashier how they're doing. So Kristen did this, and the girl was just floored that someone had actually asked her how her day was. And so she pulled out this little bin of pins that we didn't know that she had that said honorary citizen on them. And so she took the honorary citizen pin, gave it to Kristen, and we got to, have that for the day. So is a reward from Jesus sort of like a Jesus kudo pin? Like, is that what we're going for? Are we looking for something that is recognition? Or is it something that's like materials, that is wealth? What is this reward? Because if we don't get our minds around that, then it just doesn't seem like an appealing second option. To understand Jesus' reward, we kind of have to put it in context of the rest of the New Testament. See, there's a number of times where Jesus tells us things about the kingdom of heaven and tells us things about how we can live our life. And the goal, time and time again, is the exact same thing. We get to become more and more like God. We get to have a radical encounter of the God whose love surpasses all obstacles, and we get to be changed by it. Now, if that doesn't appeal to us, the reward probably isn't that appetizing, but really, for people who've decided to follow Christ with their lives, for people who are trying to follow God in everything they do, that's the biggest reward that's possible. This reward of being put into God's likeness and spending eternity with God is everything. But when we come to the table wanting something else, like human affirmation, frequently we miss the bigger reward. There's something in our way. There's something that's preventing us from experiencing the wholeness of what God has to offer. Maybe think of it like this. I've been a youth pastor for a lot of years now. I've taken students on trips to multiple locations. We have a summer camp that we go to every year. It's in a bunch of trees. It's great. It's a place away from here. And students will have incredible experiences with God there. During the chapel times and conversations with leaders, God will show up, and something really amazing will happen with those students. And they'll ask me, what is it about this place that makes it so when I'm up here, I really get to experience God? And then later in the year, we'll go on a missions trip. For the junior hires, we go to inner city Los Angeles. We'll sleep on the floor of a church. For the high schoolers, they'll go to Mexico. They'll sleep in tents on a dirt compound in Mexicali. And again, during these trips, they'll have some profound encounter with God. And they'll say, what is it about this place? What is it about sleeping on a church floor or about being on the dirt that makes it so that I experience God in such cool ways? And then we'll go to conferences that other people put on, and they'll experience the same thing. What is about this conference? And it's the same answer every time. There's nothing magical about any of it. There's nothing about the camp, nothing about Mexico, nothing about inner city Los Angeles that's more spiritual than anything else. It's just this. When you went on that trip, you left behind your life. All of the normal routine, all of the things that keep you busy, all of the things that you kept coming back to over and over again. And you came with this posture, this desire to hear from God. And so you'd make space during chapels, in conversations. You'd put yourself out there asking God to show up. And it shouldn't surprise us then that he does. It has nothing to do with the place. It has everything to do with making space for God. And that's the part that's hard for us sometimes. See, these things that we just looked at, that were on this list in the verses we read, giving, praying, fasting, all of them, these acts of righteousness, all of them are designed to give space for God to show up in our lives. And it shouldn't surprise us when he does. See, with giving, we are creating space from the structures that we put in our life, from our security. When we give, especially when we give in such a way that it really costs us something, we're setting aside some of the security that we use to feel comfortable in our life. And when we give, God breaks into that hole in our security and does something. And when we give, sometimes to a church or we give to an individual, we enter the experience of that church or that individual, and we have to put ourselves in someone else's shoes or in a bunch of people's shoes and figure out how we do things as a community or how you meet the needs of someone who has less than we do. And now it's not just about my story, it's about the story of all of these people or a story about this person. And we have to live in that. And it changes us because it's not just about our story anymore. And in that discomfort and that reorienting of our lives, God can meet us and show us a better way, a way that reflects his kingdom. When I would take junior high students on the inner city trip, one of the things that we would often do is give about 4 or 5 of them $20 for lunch, which in most contexts is not nearly enough money to feed 4 to 5 junior hires who have free reign to pick whatever fast food restaurant they want. But on this trip, they would, because they would pick the cheapest, most economical lunch they could find. They'd go to El Pollo Loco and get the cheapest menu they could, and McDonald's, get the dollar menu. The reason was because any money they didn't spend on lunch, they were allowed to then spend on other things that they could give to people who needed it. And in that particular section of Los Angeles, there were plenty of people who needed things. And so for that day, they would eat the cheapest lunch they could because they wanted to give something away. And that experience inevitably would change some of how we viewed what we have and how we interact with other people. And God would meet us there. Prayer also costs us something. It's a little different, doesn't cost us money. But prayer, really, to engage in it fully, costs us time. We have a group we have this thing called Rooted around here. You probably have heard that phrase a couple times. It's been really transformative in the lives of a lot of people. And so our Rooted groups have just gone through a prayer experience. This is fresh as a couple weeks ago. And this prayer experience in this whole Rooted thing is 3 hours long, which if you've never prayed for 3 hours, that sounds like a long time. It sounds like how someone's supposed to pray for that kind of length of time. But the same thing happens every time, and I just got a report back from one of our Rooted leaders that they had this exact conversation with someone where 2 things seem to be true. One is that the time goes by way faster than they ever thought it would. And the other is that God met them there. That something significant happened in that time where they encountered God. Because there was space, and God showed up. Now, it's important to remember that we can't actually force God to do anything. And this goes back to verses 7 and 8, which I blew through earlier, but we're going to look at them again. This is in the prayer section. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Now, here's what you have to understand about the pagans. They worship gods who are different than our God, and so they worship a bunch of false gods. But that's not actually the big issue with the pagans. The issue isn't so much that they were worshiping the wrong God. That's significant, but not nearly as significant as this. The pagans believed that if they did just the right things or said just the right things, they could control or manipulate these gods. So essentially, if I repeat a god's name or if I say a certain thing over and over and over again, I can compel a god to do what I want. Ultimately, I can pray to get my thing. That was the idea. And so they would just say the same thing over and over again, completely nonsensical in the desire that they could control or manipulate God. Now our God functions differently. He knows exactly what we need before we need it. There's no world in which we need to manipulate him for anything. In fact, we cannot. You cannot just choose a linguistic pattern, say it over and over again, and expect that God is going to do exactly what you want him to do. Our God is sovereign. It means he gets to decide. But I can say that more often than not, when people give space to God, when people really lay it out there, he meets them there. Sometimes not. You might have had a prayer experience where you just felt like there was nothing. That does happen. But a lot of times, God shows up because we gave him space. We gave him some time. And he took that time and met us there and began to change us to be more like him. Fasting, that was the third thing on the list. That's very similar. Fasting is entirely about the world of comfort that we live in. I saw this thing on the internet a little while ago. It was marriage negotiations, and husband and wife are standing on opposite sides of the table, and they have this piece of paper, and they're writing something down on the piece of paper, and you don't really know what it is. They turn it face down, they slide it to the other one, it's the same thing. And then what you come to find out is that they had been negotiating over the thermostat temperature. We live in a world where we have a lot of comforts. There's a lot of things that are disposal to make it so that we can be comfortable. What makes each of us comfortable is different, but they're there. And it's not bad that we take advantage of them. It's okay that we have these comforts. It's just that we recognize when we remove ourselves from some of these comforts or we remove their presence in our lives in some ways, that discomfort dislodges us a little bit. And it's challenging because we like our comforts. But when we rustle up our lives a little bit, God can meet us there. Now, here's what I know can happen. For a passage like this, sometimes we feel like this wasn't our issue, so I get off the hook. Particularly, the big issue here is, are we doing good things to be seen by people? And if internally we answer that question no, then it's really easy to just kind of shut down the rest of the passage. I don't want to do that for two reasons. One is this: a lot of times we don't realize when we're doing something for human attention. I'll give you one example. I do not mean this to be overly critical, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm going to talk to the millennials in the room, just plus or minus 5 years for a second, okay? Our generation, by and large, has had more access to the news and the internet than the generations that have come before us. And so what has happened is we're more aware of the ills that exist in our world. And so what a lot of younger Christians have done, and this is an absolutely wonderful thing, by the way, has raised the banner for the large systemic societal issues that exist in our nation and abroad. The big things: hunger, injustice in our country, human trafficking, refugee crises, all these things, by and large, our generation has really raised the banner for. Now, not to say that no one else has. Christians have come before us and have always said that the ills in society need to be addressed. But it's just particularly important to our generation. And so the result, I really do think, has been this: the church has elevated those discussions. As a result, we're more aware. We rethink. We continue to ponder, how can we deal with all of the crazy things in this world in ways that are elevated if we weren't here? And so for that, I'm really grateful to be part of this generation. But I'll also tell you this, is that desire to see the injustices in the world crumble can also turn into, in some cases, cynicism, when it's not happening the way we think it should. I have a friend who's in my life group. His name's Stephen Garcia. Sometimes he plays electric guitar up here. And he put words to something that I was feeling for a while. See, I was feeling the sense, but he finally nailed it for me. He said this: when he was younger, he used to spend a lot of time being furious at the church for not having dealt with the big social issues of the day. How has the church gone on this long, and there's still things like hunger, there's still things like trafficking, and why isn't the church raising a gigantic red flag saying, we've got to stop this? Why aren't we doing everything in our power to end the social ills around us? And I get that. And to some extent, that desire for justice is great, but, as Stephen noted, that can turn into cynicism, where you start to think like, man, this group of people that I've been hanging out with, they really don't have their act together. And over time, you just kind of step out of it, because you don't really want to be associated with that anymore. And then over time, you just kind of disappear from the church altogether. And the opportunity that you had to be part of a movement that can do things like that, it's gone because you've walked away. I've seen that happen a lot of times. This isn't the only issue for millennials by any means, but it's one. And I think it's rooted in this, that there's certain things that are really important to us, and we want to see the results of those. And when we don't see the results that we're looking for, we get frustrated. Maybe rightfully so, but we get frustrated. Now, the question is, what do we do with those frustrations? In their best moments, you take those frustrations and turn it into doing good with the people that you have wherever you can. But the bad of those frustrations is saying, I'm done, I'm walking away. And I don't want to see us do that. Because here's why. This is the second part of what Stephen told me. As he's paid more attention to what other people in the church are doing, some who are a completely different generation or a socioeconomic group than he is, he's noticed that things are happening. See, it may not be that our church has solved the problem to systemic poverty in the greater Los Angeles, Orange County area, but every Wednesday and Saturday, there's a bunch of people who quietly feed those in our community who are hungry with the food pantry ministry that we have here. Sometimes they get attention, a lot of times they don't. We might not have an answer to the Syrian refugee crisis, and we might not know how to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today, but there are people in our congregation who are bringing international students into their home. Students who've come from other countries to study here, need some connections, and maybe haven't even heard the gospel before. And quietly, without any expectations of being noticed or thanked, bring people into their homes. That's what tends to happen with people who've been following God for a while, is that at some point, we recognize that we can't always do the big flashy things, the things that would get the news's attention, because it's much more likely that the news will focus on one Christian who said one inflammatory, horrible comment than we'll notice the Christians who are faithfully feeding and serving their community day in and day out. That's just true of the world we live in. But if we're going to be Christians who do things quietly, primarily not to be seen by people, but primarily to be seen by God, to be part of his work in the world, to make a genuine difference in the lives of the people around us. If we're going to do so and just do it faithfully, sometimes we're not going to be seen. And when we're not seen, that's okay. And we can't be mad when the media or our non-Christian friends or whoever it is doesn't know about all of the things Christians have been faithfully doing for centuries. Because sometimes it's just quiet. And we didn't raise a big stink about it. It's not particularly flashy. It didn't end poverty. But it made a difference in someone's life and gave Christians the chance to encounter God and have their hearts transformed. And that happens a lot. Whoever we are, whatever age we are. And so here's what's important to know. Even if when you check your heart, you say, I don't really do things for show, which is something that, by the way, if pastors, someone like me who's standing in front of you in public has to be very careful with all the time, but it really is true for any of us. If it's really not for show, if it's for your desire to meet with God, then I have to ask this question. Are we doing these acts of righteousness in the first place? See, when Jesus talks about giving and prayer and fasting, he does not say, and if you give, and if you pray, and if you fast. Go back to the passages. He starts with when. When you give, and when you pray, and when you fast. Because the assumption is that Christians who are desperately desiring a relationship with God are going to do these things that throughout the centuries have helped us grow closer to God when we do them. And so for some of us, we need to find ways to begin to do just that. We need to find ways in our life to give. And give in such a way that it disrupts our lives. King David, there was one point in time where he was looking for a burnt offering for the Lord, and he was living with someone who was just going to give him one. And King David insisted on paying for the burnt offering because he said, I will not give to the Lord that which costs me nothing. When we give in such a way that it disrupts our lives, we can begin to experience God. When we pray in such a way that it disrupts our flow, where we actually set aside time, and it's time not just to get what we want or time that's spent to get a certain goal, but time just to be in the presence of God, well, something begins to happen. We disrupt the comforts of our lives. We put ourselves in different situations where we don't have all of our normal everyday things that make us feel comfortable. In that discomfort, we can begin to meet God. And so, for all of us, this week, here's my challenge. Do something good. And do something good that disrupts your life. And if you know that you are one of those people who sometimes, this might not be the only motivation, but it's a motivation. Sometimes you are motivated to do good things because you want people to see it. If that's you, if that's us, then do something good that disrupts your life and do it quietly. And in that disruption, in that space that you've created, pray to God and see if he doesn't meet you there. Because when we give God space, when he is the one that we're looking for, he is the one that we find. Let's pray. God, this morning we recognize that in the chaos and busyness of our lives, sometimes you just get etched out into the margins. I pray that this morning, this week, that we would be a people who intentionally create space. And God, I pray that when we make that space, that you would meet us there. God, we don't know how you're going to respond. We don't know how you're going to change our hearts, but God, that's part of the adventure. So we remove our securities, our routines, how we spend our time, our comforts. We set them to the side and say, God, in that void, show up, change us, and make us more like you. And help us to experience your love in new and radical ways. In your name we pray.